I wasn't man enough for the life she wanted. Those were the last words my wife, Sophia Bennett, said before walking out of our front door. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even look back. She simply grabbed her designer suitcase, climbed into a black Mercedes waiting outside, and disappeared. 5 years later, that same woman walked into my office, trembling, with tears running down her face. She looked at me and whispered, "Owen, please don't let David destroy everything." She had no idea the man she once called a failure now held the only power that could save or ruin her future. My name is Owen Parker, and 5 years ago, I believed hard work was enough. I grew up in Austin, Texas, where my father owned a small construction company. He always told me, a man's reputation is worth more than the size of his bank account. I believed every word. After he passed away, I inherited the business. It wasn't glamorous. We repaired roofs after storms, renovated homes, built patios and remodeled kitchens. My hands were rough, my boots were dirty, and I slept well every night because every dollar I earned was honest. When I met Sophia, she loved that about me. She once held my hands covered in drywall dust, smiled, and said, "These are the hands of a man who builds things. That's attractive." Back then, I believed we'd grow old together. Looking back, I realized she loved my ambition more than she loved me. Our first 3 years of marriage were simple but happy. We bought a modest home in Cedar Park. We cooked dinner together, spent weekends watching movies, and dreamed about having children. Money wasn't endless, but we never struggled. Every year, my company grew a little more. I thought we were building a life together. Everything changed the day Sophia accepted a position at Langford Global Holdings. The company belonged to David Langford, one of the most respected CEOs in Texas. He appeared on magazine covers, business podcasts, and television interviews. He flew on private jets, attended charity galas, and seemed to live inside a world that looked nothing like ours. At first, Sophia only admired him professionally. Then admiration slowly became obsession. Every evening she came home with another story. David closed another billion-dollar acquisition today. David bought a beach house in Malibu. David flew to New York for a 2-hour meeting. David says successful people never waste time. Every conversation somehow ended with David's name. I laughed it off in the beginning. Everyone admired successful people. Then one evening she looked around our dining room and sighed. "Don't you ever wish we had more?" I smiled. "We have everything we need." She looked disappointed. "I didn't ask what we need. I asked what you want." That question stayed with me longer than I admitted. A few weeks later, she invited several executives from Langford Global Holdings to our house. I spent the entire afternoon grilling steaks and cleaning the backyard. I wanted everything to be perfect. The guests arrived wearing expensive watches that cost more than my pickup truck. Their conversations revolved around stock portfolios, acquisitions, and luxury vacations. One executive asked what I did. "I own Parker Residential Construction." He nodded politely. "So you're still working on job sites yourself?" "Sometimes." He laughed. "Our CEO wouldn't even know how to hold a hammer." Everyone chuckled, even Sophia. That laugh hurt far more than the joke. Later that night, after everyone left, I quietly washed the dishes while she stood in the kitchen scrolling through her phone. Without looking up, she said, "You know what tonight proved?" I turned around. "What?" "That you don't belong in that world." I frowned. "What world?" "The world I'm trying to build." Those words echoed inside my head for days. From that point forward, comparisons became part of our marriage. Whenever I bought flowers, she'd mention David sent orchids to an entire executive team. Whenever I planned a weekend trip, she'd mention someone from the office flying to Europe. Whenever I celebrated landing a 6-figure renovation contract, she'd casually remind me David made that before lunch.
It felt like I was competing against a ghost I could never catch. Still, I refused to become bitter. I simply worked harder. Within 6 months, I signed 3 large commercial renovation contracts. For the first time, I believed my company might become something much bigger. I rushed home with a bottle of champagne. Sophia barely looked up from her laptop. "I've got great news." "Can it wait?" "No, we just landed almost $2 million in projects." She slowly closed the laptop. "Congratulations." That was it. No hug, no smile, nothing. I asked, "Is something wrong?" She looked at me for several seconds before answering. "Owen, do you know what your biggest problem is?" I honestly didn't. "I just doubled the company's annual revenue." "Exactly." "What does that mean?" "You think that's impressive because you've never seen real success." For the first time in our marriage, I couldn't find anything to say. Over the next several months, she stayed at work later and later. Business dinners became normal. Weekend conferences appeared out of nowhere. Her phone was always face down. She changed every password she had ever shared with me. Whenever I walked into the room, conversations suddenly ended. Every instinct inside me whispered something was wrong. Every part of me that loved her kept making excuses. One Friday afternoon, my foreman called. "Owen, you busy?" "Driving home. What's up?" "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this." "Tell me what?" "I just saw Sophia." "So?" "She wasn't alone." I tightened the grip on the steering wheel. "Who was she with?" Long silence. "David Langford." My heart immediately started racing. "Maybe it was business." "Maybe, but they didn't look like they were discussing spreadsheets." I hung up without another word. The restaurant he mentioned was only 15 minutes away. The entire drive I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. There had to be. Because if there wasn't, everything I believed about my marriage was already over.
I parked across the street and stared at the restaurant for almost 2 minutes. My heart kept telling me to drive away. My mind kept telling me I deserved the truth. Finally, I walked inside. The hostess smiled and asked if I had a reservation. I quietly shook my head and scanned the dining room. It didn't take long to find them. Sophia sat near the window, laughing. David Langford sat across from her, leaning forward with complete confidence. They weren't discussing spreadsheets. They weren't reviewing contracts. They were sharing a bottle of wine while holding eye contact the way couples do. I stood there frozen. Every sound around me disappeared. I couldn't hear the music. I couldn't hear people talking. I only heard my own heartbeat. Before I could decide whether to walk over, Sophia looked up. The moment our eyes met, her smile disappeared. David turned around and immediately understood who I was. He calmly stood and buttoned his jacket. I walked toward their table. "Am I interrupting a business meeting?" Neither of them answered. David extended his hand. "Owen, it's good to finally meet you." I ignored his hand. "Sophia, what's going on?" She looked uncomfortable for only a second before her expression became cold again. "Sit down." I remained standing. "Answer my question." David quietly picked up his coat. "I'll give you two some privacy." I stopped him. "No, stay. If you're important enough to have dinner with my wife, you deserve to hear this conversation too." The restaurant became strangely quiet. Sophia finally sighed. "You're making a scene." I laughed in disbelief. "I'm making a scene?" She crossed her arms. "Yes. You're having dinner with another man. He's my boss." I looked at the half-empty bottle of wine. "At 8:30 on a Friday night?" She didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I looked at David. "Are you sleeping with my wife?" Before he could speak, Sophia interrupted. "Enough." I slowly turned toward her. "Answer me." She stood up. "Fine." She took a deep breath. "Yes." One word. One simple word. 7 years of marriage collapsed inside a crowded restaurant because of one word. I expected anger. Instead, I felt completely numb. David looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Owen, this wasn't supposed to happen like this." I smiled for the first time all night. "Funny,
None of this was supposed to happen. I quietly removed my wedding ring and placed it on the table beside Sophia's wine glass. Keep it. Without waiting for another answer, I walked out. Behind me, I heard Sophia calling my name. I never turned around. Sometimes closure isn't another conversation. Sometimes it's choosing to leave. The drive home felt endless. My life.
The first 3 months after the divorce were the hardest of my life. Every room in the house reminded me of Sophia. The coffee mug she always used was still in the cabinet. Her favorite blanket was folded on the couch. Even the closet smelled like her perfume. One night, I stood in the middle of the bedroom and realized I wasn't grieving my marriage anymore. I was grieving the future I thought we were going to have. The next morning, I sold the house. I couldn't heal in a place built on memories that no longer belonged to me. I rented a small apartment 20 minutes away and poured every ounce of my energy into Parker Residential Construction. My employees noticed the change immediately. "Boss, you're here before everyone else. Somebody has to unlock the doors." They laughed. They had no idea work could become the only place where my mind stayed quiet. I stopped thinking about proving Sophia wrong. I started thinking about becoming the best version of myself. Every dollar the company earned went back into the business. New equipment, better trucks, better employees, better marketing. I personally visited every client before signing a contract. Word spread quickly. People trusted us because we actually cared about the work. 6 months later, we landed the biggest commercial renovation contract in company history. It was worth over $6 million. My accountant stared at the paperwork and smiled. "Congratulations." I smiled back. "This is only the beginning." He laughed. "I haven't heard you sound this confident in years." Confidence feels different when it comes from your own effort instead of someone else's approval. 1 year passed, then another. Parker Residential Construction expanded into commercial development, then industrial restoration. We hired architects, engineers, project managers, and legal advisors. What started as a small family business slowly became one of the fastest-growing construction companies in Texas. Business magazines started calling, podcast hosts invited me onto their shows, banks offered financing instead of rejecting loan applications. Life had completely changed. One afternoon, my assistant, Emma Collins, walked into my office carrying a folder. "You might find this interesting." I looked up from my laptop. "What is it?" "Langford Global Holdings." The name immediately caught my attention. "What's going on?" She opened the folder. "They're losing money." I frowned. "David Langford?" She nodded. 3 consecutive quarters of heavy losses. I leaned back in my chair. That doesn't sound like the genius everyone talked about. Emma smiled. "Apparently, several acquisitions failed." I quietly closed the folder. "That's unfortunate." I honestly didn't feel happy. Revenge had stopped motivating me a long time ago. My life was finally peaceful. I wasn't interested in watching someone else's fall. 2 weeks later, I attended a charity fundraising gala in downtown Dallas. Hundreds of business owners filled the ballroom. Cameras flashed everywhere. I wasn't comfortable with attention, but networking mattered. Halfway through the evening, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Owen?" I slowly turned around. Sophia. She looked beautiful, but different. The confidence she'd carried for years had faded. There were faint dark circles beneath her eyes. She smiled nervously. "Hi." I nodded politely. "Hello, Sophia." She looked surprised by how calm I sounded. "You've changed." I smiled. People usually do after 5 years. Before she could answer, someone called her name from across the ballroom. Langford Global Holdings walked toward us. He still wore expensive suits and carried himself like the most important man in every room, but something had changed. His smile looked forced. He extended his hand. "Owen Parker, congratulations on your recent expansion." I shook his hand once. "Thank you." He nodded. "Impressive work." I appreciate it. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds before I politely excused myself. As I walked away, I realized something surprising. Seeing the 2 people who had destroyed my marriage didn't hurt anymore. It felt like running into old classmates you barely remembered. 3 months later, my company crossed $100 million in annual revenue. We moved into a new headquarters overlooking downtown Dallas. On the first morning inside the new office, Emma knocked on my door. "You've got a visitor." "Do they have an appointment?" "No." "Reschedule." She hesitated. "I don't think you'll want me to." I looked up. "Who is it?" She answered quietly. "Sophia Bennett." My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt curious. Why now? After all these years, why was she here? I looked through the glass wall overlooking the reception area. She was sitting alone, holding a folder tightly across her chest. She looked nervous, almost frightened. I took a slow breath. "Send her in." Emma opened the office door a minute later. Sophia stepped inside. She looked around at the office, the skyline behind me, and the company logo on the wall. Then she looked back at me. "I almost didn't recognize you." I smiled politely. "People change." She nodded slowly. "Yes, they do." There was an uncomfortable silence before she finally spoke again. "Owen?" She tightened her grip on the folder. "I need your help." I didn't answer immediately, because after everything she'd done, I couldn't imagine a single reason why the woman who once called me not man enough would ever ask me for anything. Then she quietly placed the folder on my desk. The company logo printed across the front made my eyes narrow instantly. Langford Global Holdings. And suddenly,
I realized she hadn't come here because she missed me. She had come because something inside David Langford's empire was falling apart, and somehow I was the only person who could stop it.
Sophia slowly pushed the folder across my desk. I opened it without saying a word. The first page immediately caught my attention. Langford Global Holdings had lost over $300 million in less than 18 months. Several major contracts had been canceled. Banks had frozen new credit lines. Investors were demanding answers. I looked up. This is serious. Sophia nodded. It's worse than it looks. I closed the folder. And why are you here? She swallowed hard before answering. Because David won't listen to anyone anymore. I leaned back in my chair. That's not my problem. Tears started forming in her eyes. Please, just hear me out. I remained silent. 5 years ago, I thought David was everything you weren't. He was confident, wealthy, powerful. Everyone admired him. I thought I was choosing a better future. She lowered her head. I was wrong. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say about the past. She continued, the company is collapsing because David hid massive losses from investors. He borrowed money to make the business look successful. Now everything is falling apart. I slowly asked, why do you need me? Because every bank refused to help us. And every investment firm walked away. I looked directly into her eyes. So now you've come to the man who wasn't good enough? She couldn't even look at me anymore. I deserve that. Just then, Emma knocked on the door. Mr. Parker, David Langford is here. I smiled slightly. Send him in. A few seconds later, David entered my office wearing the same expensive suit, but this time it couldn't hide the stress on his face. He forced a smile. Owen, congratulations on your success. I nodded politely. Have a seat. He remained standing. I'll get straight to the point. We need an investor. No. He blinked. You haven't even heard the proposal. I don't need to. His expression changed. You'd rather watch thousands of employees lose their jobs? That question caught my attention. I cared about employees, always had. Leave the financial reports. He quickly placed another folder on my desk. Take 24 hours. They both left without another word. That evening, I stayed alone in the office reviewing every document. Something didn't add up. Revenue numbers were manipulated. Assets were overvalued. Loans had been hidden through shell companies. It wasn't bad management. It was fraud. The next morning, I called my legal team. 4 hours later, my attorney confirmed my suspicions. David Langford was under federal investigation. If I invested now, my company would inherit every legal problem attached to his business. Emma looked at me. So we're walking away? I looked out the window for several seconds before answering. No. She frowned. Then what? We're buying the company. It's worth almost $2 billion. I smiled. Not after bankruptcy. 3 weeks later, Langford Global officially filed for Chapter 11 protection. News channels covered the collapse across the country. Investors disappeared overnight. David's board removed him as CEO before the first court hearing even began. During the bankruptcy auction, dozens of investment firms submitted offers. My company submitted one final bid after every asset had been evaluated. 2 days later, the judge announced the winner. Parker Development Group had acquired every profitable division of Langford Global. We kept every employee who had honestly worked for the company. We canceled executive bonuses. We increased wages. We paid every contractor David had ignored. Employees stood and applauded during my first company meeting. Many of them had expected to lose everything. Instead, they were given another chance. After the meeting ended, I noticed Sophia waiting quietly near the exit. She walked toward me, holding a small velvet box. She placed it on my desk without saying a word. Inside was my wedding ring, the same ring I'd left on the restaurant table 5 years earlier. I kept it all this time.
I looked at it for a few seconds before closing the box. Why? She smiled through tears. Because somewhere deep down, I always knew I was the one who threw away something valuable. I gently pushed the box back toward her. Keep it. She looked confused. I don't want it anymore. I shook my head. Neither do I. Tears rolled down her face. I'm sorry, Owen. I know. Can you ever forgive me? I thought about that question carefully. I forgave you a long time ago. She looked relieved for a brief second before I continued. Forgiveness doesn't mean I want my old life back. She quietly nodded. I understand. Do you? She smiled sadly. I do now. She picked up the ring and slowly walked toward the elevator. Just before the doors closed, she looked back one final time. You became the man I always wanted. I smiled politely. No. She looked confused. I became the man I was always capable of becoming. You just couldn't see it. The elevator doors closed. I never saw Sophia Bennett again. 6 months later, Parker Development Group became one of the largest privately owned construction and infrastructure companies in Texas. Business magazines called me an overnight success. They were wrong. Success wasn't built overnight. It was built through years of rejection, heartbreak, failure, discipline, and refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. Sometimes people ask me whether I regret losing my marriage. My answer always surprises them. No, because if Sophia had stayed, I might have spent the rest of my life trying to prove I was enough for someone who had already decided I wasn't. Losing her forced me to become someone I never would have become otherwise. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about money, it wasn't about business, it wasn't even about love. It was this: never measure your worth by someone else's opinion. The people who walk away during your hardest season often become the ones watching your greatest season from a distance they'll never cross again. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments. Do you believe success is the best revenge, or is finding peace even more powerful? Sometimes the greatest victory isn't making the people who left you regret it. It's reaching the point where their regret no longer matters.